Tom adjusted the collar of his coat as the wind picked up, biting through the seams and chilling him to the bone. It was one of those evenings when the city felt colder than it should, partly because of the weather, partly because of the silence that crept in after rush hour, when people hurried to the warmth of their homes and left the streets empty. His boots tapped steadily on the pavement as he made his usual walk home, the comforting weight of a warm sandwich wrapped in foil cradled in his hand. It was a small treat, something he allowed himself after a long week at the auto repair shop. He passed the same alley he always did, usually filled with nothing but wind-blown paper and the smell of damp concrete. But tonight, something tugged at his attention. He paused. Out of the corner of his eye he caught a movement, faint and hesitant. Turning his head slowly, he saw her, a tiny figure crouched behind a trash bin, barely visible in the shadow cast by a flickering street lamp. Her clothes were thin, mismatched, clearly not made for the cold. She had no shoes on, just socks that were wet and clinging to her feet. Her knees were drawn to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around them as if that might somehow hold in the warmth she no longer had. Tom froze. His instinct was to look away, keep walking, because what could he really do? But her eyes met his. For the briefest second, big hollow eyes that didn't ask for anything, didn't cry, didn't even blink. They just stared through him, filled with a kind of hunger and silence no child should ever know. Without thinking, he stepped toward her. She tensed, ready to run. He stopped a few feet away and slowly crouched, unwrapping the sandwich from the foil. It was still warm turkey cheese, mustard, a soft white bun. He didn't say anything. He just held it out to her, palms open, like he was offering peace. The little girl hesitated, her eyes flicking between the sandwich and his face. Then, slowly, she reached out with both hands, trembling fingers, too thin for her agent. Took it. She didn't speak at first, just bit into it like she hadn't eaten in days. Maybe she hadn't. Tom watched her chew, watched her tiny body fight to take in something that resembled care. After a minute, she looked up at him and whispered, "Thank you, Mr. ." Her voice was barely audible, so soft he almost thought he imagined it. And then, just as quickly, she was gone. She disappeared into the alley's deeper shadows, clutching the sandwich to her chest, her small feet making no sound as they vanished behind a dumpster. Tom stood there for a while, his heart thudding in his chest, unsure of what had just happened. The city continued around him, indifferent and unaware. He walked the rest of the way home, but his steps were slower, heavier. That night he didn't eat dinner. He couldn't shake her image, those eyes, that soft "thank you," the way she faded into the darkness like a ghost. He left the lights on, not out of fear, but because the silence in his apartment felt unbearable. The next day, and the one after, Tom walked the same route home, always glancing toward that alley, always bringing an extra sandwich. He left it there, on the edge of the dumpster, wrapped and warm. But she never came back, not at first. He wondered where she had gone. Was she alone? Did she have a mother, someone looking for her, or had life already given up on her too soon? The not knowing hurt more than he expected. He was just a mechanic, a quiet man with no family of his own, living in a modest apartment with fading paint and lonely evenings. But now that little girl had opened something inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Not pity, not guilt, something deeper, a sense of shared humanity, of helplessness, and hope. He didn't know it yet, but that small act of giving a single sandwich, a moment of kindness, was the beginning of a story neither of them could have imagined, a story that would change all three of their lives forever. Tom lay on his worn-out couch, the soft hum of the heater doing little to calm the restlessness tightening in his chest. The apartment was quiet to quiet. He'd turned off the TV hours ago. Even the clock ticking on the wall seemed louder than usual, as if reminding him of how long the night stretched without sleep. He stared at the ceiling, blinking slowly, but all he could see was her. The little girl's face kept surfacing in his mind, her hollow eyes, the way her hands trembled when she reached for the sandwich, and that whisper, "Thank you, Mr." It echoed again and again. He didn't even know her name. Didn't know if she was still out there. Was she cold tonight? Was she alone? It was well past midnight when Tom sat up, rubbed his eyes, and grabbed his coat. He didn't even think about it. His body moved on its own, pulled by something stronger than logic. He stepped outside into the biting wind, the streets mostly deserted, only the occasional flicker of passing headlights painted shadows on the buildings. He retraced his steps from that day, walking slower this time, looking behind every corner, every alley, every dumpster. He called out once or twice, softly, hoping maybe she'd hear him. But the silence of the night swallowed his voice. Back home, he made a second sandwich. Turkey, cheese, same as before. He wrapped it in foil and wrote a small note on it. For you, little one. The next day, after work, he left it in the same spot where he'd seen her, on the edge of the dumpster, neatly placed so it would be visible, but safe from the wind. He lingered for a while, leaning against the brick wall nearby, pretending to scroll through his phone, eyes scanning the shadows. She never came. The next day he did the same. A sandwich, a juice box this time, a warmer blanket bundled in a plastic bag, and again nothing. By the fourth day, the food was untouched. The blanket still sat where he'd left it, now damp from the night air. Tom's heart sank. Maybe he'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe she was a ghost of his own loneliness, a projection of something he'd buried long ago. Or maybe we'd been too late. That night, back in his apartment, he sat at the edge of his bed, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped tightly. He wasn't the kind of man who prayed. But tonight, he closed his eyes and whispered into the silence, "Please, let her be okay." He didn't know why it mattered so much. He'd never had children, never married. His life had been simple. Ordinary days filled with fixing engines and evenings filled with reheated meals and old movies. But ever since he met her, something inside had shifted. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about what it meant to care. To not walk past. To not look away. The city was full of people who needed help. He knew that. But that little girl, she had come into his world, fragile and real, and left behind a silence that screamed louder than anything he'd known. Tom didn't stop hoping. He kept leaving food. He kept walking the streets, and each time he passed that alley, his heart whispered the same quiet question. Will I see her again? Tom had just set the table, nothing fancy, just a bowl of hot soup, a slice of buttered bread, and a steaming cup of tea. The lights were dim, the radio hummed quietly in the background, and for the first time in days, he was beginning to accept that maybe the little girl wouldn't come back. He'd done what he could. The food he left had gone untouched for almost a week now. Maybe she and her family had moved on, or maybe something worse had happened, and that thought was what gnawed at him most. He took a deep breath and reached for the spoon. Then a knock. It startled him. Not a loud bang, a soft, timid knock. Almost hesitant, he froze. No one ever came by. He wasn't the kind of man people visited. His few acquaintances at work didn't even know his address. His building was quiet, the kind of place people minded their own business. For a second, he wondered if he'd imagined it. But then it came again, a little louder this time. He stood, heart suddenly racing. Each step toward the door felt slower, heavier. A strange feeling gripped his chest, somewhere between fear and hope. He opened the door and gasped. It was her. The same little girl from that freezing night, standing in his doorway, small and silent as before. But this time, she wasn't alone. She was holding the hand of a woman, fragile, gaunt, and visibly exhausted. Her eyes were sunken, her cheeks pale, and her shoulders slumped under the weight of something more than just hunger. She looked like she hadn't had a warm meal or a safe night in weeks. But what hit Tom the hardest were her eyes. The woman's gaze met his, and it was filled with desperation, and something else, hope. Shaky, flickering hope. The same kind that people cling to when they're down to their last option. She told me you were kind, the woman said, softly, her voice cracked and dry. We had no one else. Tom's throat tightened. For a moment he couldn't speak. He looked down at the girl, her face dirty, but her eyes a little brighter than before. She clutched her mother's hand, tightly, as if she was the one keeping them both standing. There was something so heartbreakingly strong about her. He opened the door wider without a word and stepped aside. Come in, he said, finally finding his voice, low and steady. Please, come in. They stepped inside slowly. The woman moved like every step hurt, and the little girl didn't let go of her hand. Tom rushed to pull out chairs, to offer blankets, to pour water. His apartment had never felt so full and yet so complete. He watched as the woman sipped the warm water like it was gold. The little girl sat quietly, eyes scanning the room, and Tom realized something then. This wasn't just a moment of charity. This was a turning point. Something had brought them to him. Not just hunger, not just desperation. Trust. A single act of kindness had rippled into something much bigger, something deeper. And as he watched them sit at his table, two strangers, drawn to a light they didn't expect to find, Tom felt something shift inside him again. He wasn't alone anymore. Steam rose gently from the bowls of soup as Tom set them on the table, his hands moving with quiet urgency. He added slices of bread, a bit of butter, and 2 spoons. The little girl sat silently, her eyes wide as she watched, while her mother sat across from her, cradling her own hands in her lap as if unsure whether to reach for the food or not. Tom pulled out a third chair and sat down with them. "Please," he said softly, nodding toward the bowls. "Eat. It's warm." The woman hesitated only a second before lifting her spoon. Her hands trembled as she brought it to her lips. The first taste seemed to melt her entirely. Her eyes closed for a moment, and her shoulders sagged, as if a great weight had finally begun to slide off. The little girl followed her lead, scooping up the soup with small, quick movements. Her hunger obvious but polite. Tom watched in silence. Something about the way they ate, not ravenously, but gratefully, filled his chest with a kind of ache he didn't know how to name. He didn't interrupt, just let them eat. The kitchen was quiet, save for the gentle clinking of spoons and the occasional sigh of relief. After a few minutes, the mother looked up, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. Her voice, when it came, was softer than before, but steadier. "My name is Maria," she said, "and this is Sophie." Tom nodded. "Nice to meet you both." Maria's eyes welled up. She looked away, embarrassed. "I never thought I'd be knocking on a stranger's door like that. But my daughter," she glanced at Sophie with a trembling smile. "She told me about you. Said you gave her food when she had nothing. Said you were safe." Tom said nothing. He didn't need to. "We left home 2 weeks ago," Maria continued, her voice now quivering. "It wasn't safe anymore. Her father, he wasn't kind. He changed, got mean. I tried to hold out for a while, but when he started hurting Sophie," her voice broke. She covered her mouth, trying to stifle the sob rising in her throat. Tom gently pushed a box of tissues toward her. "We tried shelters, but they're full. Every night, no room. We've been sleeping in stairwells, alleyways. I told her we'd be okay, but..." She shook her head, tears spilling over now. "I didn't know what else to do." Sophie reached over and gently held her mother's hand, her small fingers lacing with her mother's shaking ones. Tom's eyes burned, but he held himself steady. He reached out and rested his hand on the table beside them. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "You got out. You protected your daughter. That takes more strength than most people have." Maria looked up at him, then her eyes filled with something fragile, relief, maybe, or disbelief. "And you let us in." "I'm glad you came," Tom replied, and he meant it. Just then, Sophie let out a small giggle. Both adults turned to her, surprised. Tom blinked. It was the first sound of joy she'd made since stepping into his home. "I like the soup," she said, shyly smiling at Tom. "Tastes like a warm hug." Tom chuckled, something cracking open inside his chest. He hadn't laughed in weeks, maybe months. Maria smiled through her tears. "She hasn't laughed in days." Tom sat back in his chair, his heart full in a way it hadn't been in years. The quiet ache of loneliness he'd lived with so long had begun to fade, replaced by something he hadn't expected: connection, purpose. He looked at the two of them, worn, bruised by life, but still fighting to survive, and something settled. In his heart, he wasn't just helping them, they were healing something in him too. The apartment felt different now. The same old furniture, the same faded wallpaper, but everything had come alive. There were dishes in the sink from baking cookies, a colorful drawing taped to the fridge that read "Thank you, Mr. Tom" in crayon, and soft laughter echoing from the hallway where Sophie was playing with a stuffed bear Tom had picked up from a thrift store. It had been 3 weeks since that knock on his door, 3 weeks since his quiet, empty life had been filled with voices, warmth, and purpose. Maria now worked part-time at a small corner store just 5 blocks away. Tom had helped her get the job by vouching for her with the owner, who'd always respected Tom's word. It didn't pay much, but it was something, enough for Maria to feel like she was rebuilding, step by step. She always came home tired but smiling, her eyes no longer shadowed by fear. Sophie, on the other hand, had bloomed. She laughed often now, unfiltered and loud. The kind of laugh that made Tom stop whatever he was doing just to listen. She talked about school like it was a dream. She colored every surface she could with drawings of sunshine and houses and stick figures holding hands, and she called him Mr. Tom like it was his given name, always with affection, always with a smile. That evening, they sat on the couch together. The TV flickered with an old animated movie. Maria was in the kitchen humming softly, stirring something warm on the stove. Tom sat with a soft blanket over his lap, eyes half focused on the screen. Sophie scooted closer and gently leaned into him. Her head rested against his arm. He looked down and smiled. Tired already, kiddo? She shook her head, but didn't move. After a pause, her tiny voice rose, barely above a whisper. Mr. Tom, can we stay forever? The question landed. With such weight, so pure and full of hope, it squeezed his heart. He blinked hard, the sting behind his eyes rising faster than he could stop it. He looked at her, this little girl who had once hidden behind a dumpster, who had taught him what it meant to open his heart again, and he knew his answer without doubt. He swallowed the lump in his throat and said, softly, you already are home. Sophie smiled and nestled closer, and in that moment, in a modest apartment filled with the smell of dinner and the sound of belonging, Tom realized his life hadn't just changed, it had been rewritten. He hadn't rescued them. They had saved him.